Hey, good morning. Thanks for everybody for joining on a beautiful Monday morning. We're excited that so many of you are interested in this topic, and we just want to say welcome. So, as I noted in the chat and a couple of times, we do have you all muted, and we also have cameras or requesting cameras off so we can preserve our bandwidth. And today at our webinar, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to share the Texas vision for evidence grant making, as well as the national perspective on the use of evidence. You're going to hear about some of the work that we've been doing over the course of the last year. You'll find out what evidence-based grant making really is. You'll get to see our proposed evidence framework that we've been piloting, and we will be piloting in an upcoming request for application, or RFA. And hopefully after all of that, we'll still have some time to answer your questions, and we'll close with next steps. So let's dive in. Next slide, please. Great, and there's our agenda, Texas vision, national vision. We'll look at the framework, and then as I noted, time for questions. Next slide, please. Great. It's my honor to announce our speakers today, especially our chairman, Brian Daniel, who is here with us. He's very passionate about the use of evidence and performance outcomes, so we're excited that he's here with us today. We also got our national guru from Results for America, Celeste Ritchie. Celeste, she is a deep subject matter expert on building evidence and why it's so important, so welcome, Celeste. And we've been working in partnership with a few colleagues, including Lee Rector, the Executive Director of the Texas Workforce Investment Council. She's been leading our team as we've worked to build our evidence framework. We love working with Lee. She's a super smart colleague. And we have one other team member who won't be speaking today, but we've worked closely with Diane Tackett from Rural Capital Area Workforce Board. She's bringing her brain power and field expertise into this conversation as well. And for those of you who know Diane, you know she's asking all the right questions. Finally, we're joined by Courtney Arbor, who is the Director for the Workforce Development Division. Courtney has been leading the charge for evidence and outcomes for the last several years, and her enthusiasm for outcomes is really a driver for the work that we're doing and making sure we get it done right. So welcome to our speakers. And then let me also introduce myself. I'm Jen Troke. I'm the Director of Workforce Grants and Initiatives here at the Texas Workforce Commission, and I'm so pleased to bring my perspective on grant making to this conversation. I've learned so much from this all-star team. So now let's do a little warm-up. We're going to start with a couple of polling questions. Find out who is on the chat this morning. Polling question number 1. What type of organization are you representing today? Are you an educator? Are you a workforce developer? Are you an employer? Or other? And if other, just go ahead and let us know who you are in the chat. And on the right side of your screen, just go ahead and click one of those options for us. No wrong answers on this one, not a trick question. All right, and as our poll wraps up, let's see who is here with us today. I think it's wrapping up. What I will do is while that poll is wrapping up, I'm going to flip to the second question. This one involves you guys typing into our chat. So when I talk about evidence-based, what words are coming to mind for you? So please put whatever is coming to mind when you think about evidence-based, what does that mean to you? Proven to work well, proven methods, data analytics, goals and objectives. Yeah, great. Validation, data. I see lots of data. Research, data. Awesome. Documented success, inputs, outputs, outcomes, results. Driven, data. Proof of accomplishment. Okay, awesome. This is so exciting. I can tell already we have the right team on this webinar. So excited. Proven track record. Exactly. We're going to talk about all this and more. you can keep answering that, but let me go ahead and ask people to go ahead and answer our third polling question. And it's, why did you join us today? Did you want to learn more about the use of evidence in grant making, but it makes you nervous? Have you dabbled in evidence usage and you want to align your work? You love the idea of using evidence, but you wanted to learn more about how to do it. Evidence schmevidence. I have no idea what this is about. Or other. You can also put your reason in the chat. All right, and we're going to give you just a moment to choose your choice there. For the record, evidence schmevidence is not easy to say. All right. And I think the poll is going to close up here. Team. Yes, I think so. Well, while that's closing up, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to introduce our chairman, Brian Daniel, and I am going to turn it over to him. If we can go to the next slide, please. So excited that you were here today with us this morning. Thank you. Chairman Daniel.
Well, thank you so much, Jen. How's everybody doing this morning? I hope well. It's a busy Monday morning here in the great state of Texas. And so I really appreciate this opportunity to spend just a couple minutes talking with you about something that I just think is an incredibly important shift for where we are headed at the World Commission in terms of our grant making and the strength of where I think this can take us long term. If you look really at our core mission here, it's really just finding better outcomes for Texas workforce. That's folks who are working in Texas, folks who would like to work in Texas, and certainly the employers that create the jobs here in the state. And it's finding ways that we can make sure that all of those groups to continue to succeed. That success is only going to come when we can find ways to lift all those groups simultaneously. Luckily, they are not at cross purposes with each other. In fact, they're aligned pretty well, and it's our job to make sure that those alignments remain in place and our ability to continue to push that forward on what may be parallel tracks or it may be all one effort. It really doesn't matter to us. We're trying to get to that end goal of this very strong and forward-moving Texas workforce. This particular use of evidence is very intriguing with me. Lee Rector and I started conversations on this topic a long time ago when we were both working in the governor's office. And so I think there's a lot of strength in what we can do in terms of evidence-based grant making that really help us have those positive impacts on the workforce that we all want to have. You know, we make quite a few grants here. We do a good job on contracting. We do a good job on getting RFAs out there. We do a decent job of evaluating these RFAs. And we collect some information from those, but I just don't feel like we're even collecting all the information that we can from where we are. There's just a little bit of juice left in the orange, and we need to squeeze that out of there so that we can really start making decisions about the effectiveness of our grant programs. We haven't been using an evidence-based model, and so what data we collect is either what I would consider very minimum or sometimes accidental. That's not wrong or bad because we didn't really intend to extract a lot of data out of it. But I think when we're making decisions on limited taxpayer dollars and we're making decisions for such a large group as the 14 or so million people that make up the Texas workforce, you know, I think we can do a better job of an agency of basing our decisions on a data-driven analysis and one that takes into account successes through time so that we can build models that continue to be successful. If our true goal is getting Texas trained and employed long-term and making sure that employers have the things that they need to create those jobs long-term, we've got to keep telling this story. But we can't just tell the anecdotal side of the story. We've got to talk data points. We've got to help folks understand the significance of the anecdotal story that they're hearing. The two go together, and they actually strengthen one another so well. Both can stand on their own merits, meaning either an anecdotal discussion or some sort of analytical analysis. But when we bring those together, it helps us tell a much more powerful story. So I think partly due to the good relationship that we have with the Texas Workforce Investment Council and Lee Rector, partly due to my experience in the governor's office and partly due to just great leadership on the part of Courtney Arbor and Jen Trope. We've been working on this for some time. These things don't just come out of the blue. It's been more than a year at this point that we've been working on this effort. And so I'm pretty excited to start seeing some things get put into action. You can talk forever. Putting things into action is where I think the real strength and leadership of an agency comes from. And we're about to step. This is important for us. This is important for our state. This is an absolute turning point for this agency, for TWC, as we move forward with this idea that we're going to do some evidence-based activities that really help strengthen what we want. And so let's talk about what some of those specifics are, because again, the analytical part of the story really bolsters the anecdotes that I just told you. If we take a look at the next slide, what we're going to see is a summary of where our first real deep dive into this experience is going to lead us. So we are doing a pilot grant. This is going to be in building and construction trades. And we're anticipating that this RFA is going to be out in the spring. It's going to be an evidence-based experience for us through the grant making and the RFA. What you see here on the screen are just some points that I want you understand about that RFA and how I think this all comes together for TWC to really find success here. So our focus here is going to be on opportunity youth. It's a definable group for us, one that's important, I think, for a lot of reasons. You've got folks here that have been sort of disconnected from an education system. They've been disconnected from the workforce system. Training and employment are both needed to help make sure that this group can find the success that they need. Opportunity youth are defined so we can identify them as a group. We can know demographically the makeup of the group, and we can define success as the group enters the educational and workforce system. And so because we have a very narrowly defined group and one that we can track, the evidence-based framework is really going to enable us to measure success in a consistent way across this group. Now, I don't want to get too far into that because I think Lee's going to talk about that. And frankly, she can do a much better job than I can about showing how this evidence framework gives us the strength to measure across a group, particularly a defined group like opportunity youth. The RFA is going to have specific performance outcomes. And with that comes incentives for grantees. That's important. It's not sort of pay for performance as much as it is when you can have consistent performance, when you can have success for participants, when you can have measurable success now and moving forward. I think that's something worth incentivizing because at the end of the day, we get a better product. Frankly, the RFA is about money. How we structure the payout of that money is entirely up to the agency, and using an evidence-based framework helps us structure the payout of the money so that we get the most bang for the taxpayer dollars, which frankly, for any agency, that's what we should be doing on any RFA that we put out. And then the evaluation of that becomes extremely important because it's not just about this grant. We're building models for the move forward. This is about building models that we can replicate and scale over and over and over again. And the other, I think, important thing to keep in mind is in building those models, it means that we can, in some ways, be more innovative on the selection side at the RFA level. We don't have to do things the way we've always done it. It doesn't have to be just completely the usual suspects in terms of who's applying for the grants. All grants sort of get into that mode, and it's not bad. My suspicion is that even with an evidence-based framework put in place, many of the folks who participate actively in TWC grants not only will be eligible to participate, but will really be able to showcase their innovation in a way that they haven't been able to as well. I think new people will be able to enter in, and I think that kind of collaboration and friendly competition is only going to strengthen the outcomes and our ability to replicate and scale these models for the state as a whole. And so those evaluations are going to become very important for staff here. The data that we're going to gather is going to be important for the data then that we can share with the state. This is a team effort. This only works as a team effort. And in fact, there's going to be other folks who have been participating in these discussions doing very similar ventures. It's my understanding that the Workforce Investment Council is going to use this kind of framework on their next Texas Talent Connection. I think their RFA is going to beat ours out in the spring coming up. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how their success helps them move. You know what? We've got a great discussion here in front of us today in a limited amount of time. And so I want to let some other folks to talk about some of their experiences and their expertise here, because I think we've assembled a panel here today that really brings that kind of expertise together in one place and lets us learn in a short amount of time all we can about what I think is a very important topic. So I'm glad you're here. I'm glad to see all the interest. I was reading the chat rapidly as everybody was talking about why they're here. And I think we're all coming at this from the standpoint of we're going to learn more about this and we're going to make it work. So it gives me great pleasure at this point, as we move through the agenda here, to turn things over to Celeste Ritchie from Results for America. We've been working with her for a while. She's been part of this team discussion. And so I welcome Celeste Ritchie to talk with us about her work and some of the great things that they've been doing in terms of evidence-based framework.
Thanks so much. Yeah, really appreciate being here today. Thanks so much for having me. And I want to echo a lot of what was just said in that, you know, Texas is really leading the way for the public workforce system in these efforts. And so I just feel really honored to be part of the team. Thanks for having me. As folks mentioned, I'm from Results for America. The next slide just gives a little bit of a high-level view. Who are we? Why am I here? So RFA, we're a nonprofit, and our mission is to make investing in what works the new normal. And so a lot of the strategies that are happening in Texas that we're going to hear about today, we focus on those types of things, helping decision makers to use evidence and data in an effective way to get the impacts that they want for the communities that they serve. The next slide shows just a bit about where we work. I won't expect you to see, you know, every city that's labeled here, but you can see we're here in Texas, and very glad to be working with you all. We work with around 200 cities across the country. We work at the federal, state, and local level, again, to help folks access and leverage data and evidence. And a little bit more on the next slide about the specific efforts that we've been working on with our Texas Workforce Fellows. We started out with this work lab roadmap, and these are just 7 policy strategies. I like to think about them in kind of big buckets, and we think about building evidence, right, through evaluation, through data, leveraging that evidence and linking it to funding, so either through the way that the funding is awarded or actual performance contracts where you're linking, you know, the outcomes that you want to the payments, but then also, you know, the transparency and the kind of spreading of this work. How do we talk about this work? How do we build momentum? And how do we maintain transparency with the public about where the funding is going and what the performance that we're getting for the funding that is spent? So these are all captured in a larger report that goes into detail, and we're happy to share that link out with folks after the webinar. The next slide talks a bit about our workforce fellowship, which is how we started working more closely with folks in Texas. So we're actually convening senior workforce leaders from state and local workforce agencies, and there's a chance for folks to learn together, to learn from each other, right, in this peer network, to access very specific TA, you know, whether it's working on a specific grant or contract, helping to develop evaluation plans and things like that. And so we're in the midst of that right now, and we're working across 7 different states. And I wanted to highlight just a few wins we've had, and you'll notice that Texas is in every category of win. But some of the things that really stand out to me include the fact that folks are defining evidence, and we see that in Colorado, Pennsylvania, Texas, also creating performance-based grants or contracts, and that Texas, again, is part of that cohort. We're also seeing that in California, in DC, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, and Virginia, and then creating evaluation plans or actually conducting evaluations, which Texas is also doing along with their peers in DC, Colorado, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. So really excited to see this kind of work, I think especially given everything that has happened this year. You know, there's a lot of pressure, but I think as we look at the next slide, I would argue that we need an evidence-driven workforce system now more than ever, right? We have limited funding. That's always been an issue, but it's combined with really unprecedented need. And so for those reasons, we need to focus funding where we can achieve the greatest impact. And I want to, if you can go back just one slide, I want to emphasize that it is not about excluding programs that have not yet built evidence, because I know that it can feel kind of nervous, especially if your organization or your program is kind of in the beginning of your learning journey. But I want to, I want to emphasize that it's really about continuous improvement, and I think there's room for everyone in this movement, and that each grant or contract or program, there's an opportunity to learn more about what works and what needs improvement, and we can do that together. I think the other angle here is that federal requirements for evidence-based programs are growing. And so now is the time to be, the way that Texas is in terms of getting ahead of the curve and leading the way in evidence-driven workforce solutions. Next slide, please. So what is evidence-based grant making? I kind of hit on these points before, but I think first you need to define evidence of effectiveness, because there's a million types of evidence, but what exactly are we trying to figure out? We're trying to figure out if our program is achieving the outcomes that we hope that it's achieving. And so creating that common understanding, which is something that Texas has already achieved, creating kind of a spectrum, right, to understand that it is a journey, and that there's different types of evidence, all the way from, just anecdotal evidence or some basic program data, all the way to a fully randomized controlled trial that is starting to get to that place of really understanding what the program is causing, and those outcomes that we can directly attribute to the program. Another component of it is outcomes and performance-based payments. And so within a contract or grant, you can link payments to priority outcomes. So instead of just paying for an activity, you can actually pay for increased wages or long-term employment in a related industry. You can also use the evidence to, determine who's getting the award. So it can be part of the application process. It can be, something that grantees or awardees agree to in terms of building evidence as part of that. So if there isn't strong evidence, maybe we decide that part of that funding is actually going to go to an evaluation. So, those are all part of, and that kind of leads into the third bullet point here, which is using data to determine how well we are serving constituents through the services. And so that could be evaluation, that could be just looking at, performance data, and really looking at equity, making sure that we're breaking down that data into appropriate categories. As we were talking about before with opportunity youth, making sure that we're actually understanding who the program is working for, who it's not working for, in what setting, what other factors are included there. So those are three really big important points. And the next slide, I'm going to just talk very briefly about some examples from the federal and state level. As I mentioned, there's just an increasing prioritization of evidence of effectiveness. And so we see that at the U.S. Department of Labor, in RESCA, in WIOA, we have the pay for performance provisions there. Although there's actually, lots of ways to do evidence and outcomes-driven grant and contract making under WIOA that you actually don't need to use any special provisions. So I always want to highlight that. Don't worry too much about some of these kind of fancier, more specific models. There's lots of ways that we can do this, and I love that Texas has tapped into that and is moving ahead. When we look at the workforce agencies we're working with in our fellowship, we can see just a couple examples here, but we have, as I mentioned before, lots of states that are defining evidence of effectiveness, and a couple of recent RFPs that have gone out, one from our Pittsburgh Workforce Fellow for a training program that is really focused on industry recognized credentials. So they're going to actually be offering 50% of payment upon enrollment into a training program, and then 50% when the credential is earned. And that's to both provide the, a bit of funding up front to get the program going, but saying, we're really interested on credential attainment, and that's where we want to focus our money and incentivize that. And then Central Ohio, they actually have just issued 2 RFPs and for their one-stop provider as well as their main career services contract. And they're going to be linking payments to priority outcomes and thinking about how to go maybe above and beyond what the current WIOA performance metrics are to say, well, what is really important in our community and how do we link payment in order to incentivize in that, these outcomes that are so important to us and to our community. So that's a little bit from our perspective, from the national perspective. I'm happy to connect with folks after this webinar if you have more questions about these items. But with that, I'll hand it back over.
All right, thank you, Celeste. We have so enjoyed working on this team with you, Celeste, and participating in this Fellows program that you and Results for America have put together. It has prompted and generated a ton of work and a lot of great learning for Texas and many other states. So thank you again for being here and for making this available. I want to echo the chair's comments about getting outcomes from our grants. This is something we've been working on for a while now, as many of you know. So when the Results for America Fellow opportunity presented itself, we wanted to take full advantage of it. We've always included deliverables in grants, but not all of them are pointed toward the ultimate outcome, which is what we most value with the use of these dollars. We've appreciated Celeste for the expertise and guidance that she's brought to Texas and this work. And with that help, we're really able to expand a lot of the deliverables and using evidence to make this of greatest value to everyone who is a benefactor of this work. I want to thank the chairman who champions this work and is fully supportive of us and has been ensuring that we maximize the success of these grants. I want to briefly share the major products that the team has put together. First, the team developed an evidence framework that will be discussed in detail momentarily. That framework outlines the need for building the evidence base and a way for programs to determine where they sit on the evidence spectrum. As the chair noted, we'll be releasing our first request for applications, or RFA, the Building and Construction Trades Program, and that will include the evidence framework. So applicants will get a chance to use the framework and performance outcomes when that RFA is published this fall. We'll be hosting a prospective applicant conference once the request for application is published, so you'll be able to ask more specific questions once you have a live document in your hands. So what does all this mean for you as a grantee? First, it means that when you see the Building Construction Trades RFA, you'll see new vocabulary about the use of evidence, some new forms, and soon after that Building Construction RFA comes out, you'll note that the Texas Workforce Investment Council's Texas Talent Connection RFA will be published with similar language and similar forms. So you'll see one at a time. This will be a slow expansion into far more grants over time, but we're testing it out with building construction first. Please know that you're going to see new vocabulary, terms like high fidelity in the model. You'll even see talk of logic models. You'll also see new forms to complete in the application where we'll ask you to share any evaluations that you've done on your programs and share any promising research that you've incorporated into your model or are trying to replicate. As I mentioned, we're committed to hosting a prospective applicant conference to help answer your questions. The Texas Workforce Investment Council will do the same with the Texas Talent Connection when it is released. We know you'll have questions and we'll be ready. Future RFAs will allow us to incorporate those lessons learned from this initial pilot, and we'll be coming back to those who are interested in sharing. Finally, I want to share the launch of our new evidence webpage on the TWC site, where we'll be parking all of the evidence resources so that everyone can pull them down as needed. Let's take a look at that. Here's a screenshot of the new evidence grant-making page. I know the print is small, but you all are the first to see it. We've posted the evidence framework here. We'll continue to post other resources as we get them, including the evaluation results from the building construction trades. We'll be posting federal resources on this page too. For example, the Department of Labor has an evidence database called CLEAR, which stands for Clearinghouse for Labor Evaluation and Research. We will link it here so that all of you can become acquainted and use these tools. We'll post this webinar on the webpage shortly after today's webinar also. With that, I hope you've found this informative, and I'd like to turn it over to Lee Rector, who will share a lot more detail about the evidence framework.
Great, thank you, Courtney. I'm really happy to be here today to Thank you, Courtney. Really happy to be here today to talk about the beginnings of evidence-based grant making in Texas. For the next 10 minutes or so, I'll walk viewers through the evidence framework that's been developed for the building construction trades and the Texas Talent Connection grants. But before I get into this slide, I'd like to echo Chair Daniel's message about the importance of creating and conducting evaluation plans in Texas to build evidence for Texas Workforce Commission future grants. And for clarity, I want to point out that the evaluation studies that I'll be referring to in this framework are different from the evaluation studies he referred to. And these are studies that are held and rated by national databases. And I think that will become clear as we move through the presentation. So here on this slide, you see the 5 leveled or tiers of the framework, and these will be included in applications for the grants. The first tier, new, requires no evidence. The evidence requirements increase for each tier, with the high evidence tier requiring the most rigorous evidence that Celeste referred to in particular. In these initial pilots of evidence-based grant making, the majority, if not all applicants, will probably fall into one of the first 3, the new, the evidence, or the performance tiers. We hope that in the future, applicants will progress up the evidence framework regardless of which tier they start in. So the goal really is for applicants to provide the best evidence that they have to support their application, whether that evidence be anecdotal in the form of participant surveys, results, letters of support from participants' employers, or other testimonials, or performance data from a similar program or the same program, or an external evaluation that meets certain criteria and demonstrates that the program had positive and meaningful outcomes. And for those applicants who are developing a new program that cannot be supported by any of the evidence I just mentioned, don't worry, we still really want you to apply. Can we go back one slide, please? Yeah, let's stay here just for a second. So applicants will be asked to select an evidence tier based on the information and data that they choose to include in the application to support the strength of their ability to implement the proposed program to achieve the outcomes specified. And to assist in the selection of a program tier, a decision tree will be included in the application to help you determine which tier is appropriate for your program. An applicant must select one and only one tier and provide information and data to support that selection. With my comments as context, let's now move on and look at the 5 program tiers and the evidence required for each one. So on the following slide, you can see the very first tier of the evidence framework is the new program tier. New, by virtue of its very definition, means that there will be no evidence to support the proposed program. So there's no evidence, no anecdotal evidence, no data or evaluations required. You can see that there is a requirement for the applicant to build the case for why the proposed program will achieve the outcomes specified in the application, and the applicant must also demonstrate that there is sufficient capacity to collect data to collect outcomes of the program. On the next slide, you'll see the experience tier. On this tier of the evidence framework, an applicant will have had experience implementing the program they are proposing or a very similar program. And while the applicant will not have evaluations or performance data, they will be able to provide testimony as to program effectiveness based on anecdotal information. You can see here we note success stories and other testimonials. Evidence could also include participant surveys. The applicant must have a track record in the proposed program and have been providing that program for at least 1 year prior to the application. We will ask for anecdotal information to be included as an attachment to the application, or that a URL link is embedded to provide access to materials for the grant evaluator. On the next slide, you'll see the performance tier. On this third tier of the evidence framework, applicants will have implemented the program that they are proposing, or one that is very, very similar, and they will have performance data. The application will include a data chart that will be required to fill in, including things like number of participants and completers, number of certifications awarded, number of completers employed at 6 and 12 months post-program completion, and average wage increases. Now, we understand that an applicant may not have all of the data sets that we're looking for in the chart. So we would ask that applicants complete the chart to the greatest degree possible with data from at least the last 2 years. The data would need to demonstrate that there are positive outcomes for participants. And this data requirement necessarily means that an applicant has, in fact, previously conducted performance assessments of the program and has collected the data. One comment before we move to the final 2 tiers. Again, as grant administrators, we anticipate that applicants for the next building construction trades and Texas Talent Connection grants will select one of the 3 program tiers I just described. Certainly, with all of the applications I've looked at over the past many years, there is not one that would not fit into one of those 3 tiers. The goal, though, is to help you move forward and up on the evidence tier. So the next 2 tiers are the ones that we hope to assist applicants to eventually be able to select by building evidence, as Chairman Daniel mentioned, and by accessing evaluation studies that we will help you with that help support the design and anticipated outcomes of your proposed programs. So as we move to the next slide, here you see the moderate evidence tier requirements. The moderate evidence tier requires that an applicant identify and submit one evaluation study of a program that is essentially similar to the grant program being proposed in the application. So this is no longer building evidence that Chairman Daniel described. This is finding evidence that we're describing. So essentially similar means that the grant program proposed in the application is very similar in program design and outcomes with only limited modifications to the program and the evaluation study. Additionally, the evaluation study must show that the evaluated program had a positive and meaningful outcome on program participants and be rated by the study source as having moderate evidence. So in reaching this tier, you would want to look at one of the sources I will describe for a program, an evaluation of a program that is very similar to yours that have been rated as at least moderate in evidence, and we will provide those sources. It's the evaluation study that supports the strong evidence. And as Celeste mentioned, it does this through establishing specific statistical significance, usually by the use of a control group for the study. And in explaining that, I mean that the evaluation study compared the program participants to a control group and statistically determined that participant outcomes could be moderately assessed as resulting from the program when compared to those in the control group who did not participate in the program. The sources of evaluation studies will be included in the evaluation application. These include the Clearinghouse for Labor Evaluation and Research, or CLEAR, Pathways to Work Evidence Clearinghouse, and Crime Solutions. Each of these 3 sources of evaluation studies assigns a rating to a study. And while the nomenclature may differ across the 3, it is not difficult to determine the equivalent ratings that denote high and moderate. And in a moment, you'll see these sources and their URLs. So for moderate evidence tier, only one evaluation study is required from one of the 3 sources. Again, the study must demonstrate positive, meaningful outcome for program participants and be determined to be a moderate evidence study or equivalent by one of the 3 sources. Applicants in this tier will be required to support their proposed grant programs by completing a table in the application and information such as evaluation source, the name and full citation of the study, the evidence rating, the study source, and additional descriptive information will be required. On the next slide is the high evidence tier. Note, this tier is very similar to the moderate evidence program tier that you saw on the previous slide. Major difference is that for the high evidence program tier, applicants need to include not one, but two or more evaluation studies of programs that are essentially similar in design and statistically demonstrate a positive and meaningful outcome from one of the three sources I've noted. The studies must also be designated by the source as high evidence studies. For the high program tier, it's expected that the proposed grant program will mirror the design of and achieve similar outcomes to the program that was evaluated in the evaluation study. The proposed program in your application must be implemented with no or extremely limited modifications. So one way to think about this requirement at high evidence tier is that your proposed grant program should be a replication of the program in the evaluation studies. Again, to reiterate, our expectations is that most, if not all, will fall in the first three tiers: the new program tier where no evidence is required, the experienced program tier where anecdotal evidence is required, or the performance program tier where applicants will provide performance data from the program they're proposing that they have conducted in the past. Moderate and high evidence program tiers are where we hope to help you move in the future by building evidence through evaluation of Texas programs and helping applicants access relevant resources and evaluation studies. On this next slide, you can see the three sources that I've been referring to: Clearinghouse for Labor Evaluation Research, or CLEAR, Pathways to Work, and Crime Solutions. Each of these sites assesses the quality of evaluation studies and research and looks at effectiveness of particular policies and programs. So CLEAR, I would say, would be your primary source to look for an evaluation study, with Pathways being second and Crime Solutions being third. You can see the URLs for these sources are noted and will be included in the slide deck when it's posted after the webinar. So I know that was a fairly quick walkthrough on a fairly technical part of the evidence-based grant making in Texas. This is the evaluation framework as a specific part, is different from some of the contracting and performance payments that we talked about. But that concludes my remarks, and I'll hand over to Jen.
Thank you, Lee. That was an excellent review of the framework. And I see some questions are starting to come into the chat. So if you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat as we're winding our way towards the Q&A piece at the end. But time for another polling question. We're going to give it another shot. Based on what Lee just reviewed with you all, if you were to apply to a current and familiar request for application, or RFA, where would you place yourself on the evidence continuum? Would you be high, moderate, new? And as Lee said, honestly, we do not have expectations that we'll be seeing examples of high evidence in these initial pilots. That's something we're building towards together in the coming years. So go ahead and pick one of those tiers where you see yourselves, and we should have the results in a moment. And let's go ahead and flip to the next slide. So how are we going to build the evidence base for the future? I'm really glad that you asked. In addition to the new focus areas approved by the Commission in the Building and Construction Trades RFA, they've also approved funds for an evaluation study. That evaluation allows TWC to understand the program models of each grantee and whether or not those program models were effective. If it was effective, that's important to share with others so we can continue to invest in models that are promoting success for our customers. And as Celeste noted, the need for evidence is only continuing to grow as resources become tighter and tighter. We want to be sure we're investing those limited dollars where they have the most potential to produce results. And it looks like we had a lot of people coming in at the new tier as expected. So perfect. Thank you, guys. Our last polling question for the morning is really the million-dollar question. Do you see the benefits of using an evidence-based approach? So after hearing all of this and seeing all of this, do you see the benefits? And we're going to pull up that poll. And the responses are yes, we're ready to go. Maybe we're not quite there, but we'll review the RFA the RFAs when they're published, or we'll be ready next year. I'm not seeing that poll. Oh, there it is. There is the poll. And even if you're not quite ready, the good news is that we'll hope you'll continue to track the progress of TWC and the Texas Workforce Investment Council and our local boards as we contemplate evidence in our grants. All right, so that moves us through our content. We're going to pause for a moment and we're going to look at the questions that we've gotten. They're coming in. So if you guys will hold for one moment, we'll start answering the questions in just a second. Oh, actually, the first question is, I believe it's for you, Lee. The question is, will there be a limit of 3 years for successful programs? I think somebody is thinking about Wagner-Pizer grants specifically. So I'm going to mute myself, and if somebody will unmute Lee so she can answer that question, please.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So I'm guessing that is the Wagner-Pizer 7B funded Texas Talent Connection. For the last, there was a maximum of 3 years, but the second and third year were not guaranteed. There has to be a new application each year. At this point, that remains in effect. So that's not going to change with this. One of the questions that I saw, which I thought I'd address while I'm just on here, Jen, is the question was, does the tier impact the amount awarded? For Texas Talent Connection, it will not. And when I finish this answer, Jen can come back on. For Texas Talent Connection, it does not. How the tiers are going to play into the application is that all applications for Texas Talent Connection are going to be a 100-point application for the full application. And then there will be up to 10 bonus points that can be awarded based on the evidence tier that is selected and substantiated in the application, with high evidence being at the full 10, moderate at 6 points, performance at 3, experience at 1, and new. There are no performance available points because new, as by definition, will not have any evidence. So we're building that into a bonus structure for us. Jen, do you want to answer that for TWC?
Yes, it will be a similar process for us as well. So the one issue I want to flag, and we said this earlier, but I just want to say it again, is for specific RFAs, and our building construction RFA is very close to being published. We won't answer, we will not answer specifically, but as we did commit to doing, once that is published, we will have a prospective applicant conference, probably about a week or two after it publishes, where we will answer your questions. So just wanted to let you know that we will definitely work to answer those very specific questions about specific RFAs. Lee, I want to flip back to you though, because there was a really good question about, they were confused about the evaluation studies. They said it's something that we are obtaining from one of the 3 sources, for example, the clearinghouse, or can we partner with an agency to conduct a study on a current program we have?
So there's going to be a short and long answer to this. The short answer is the evaluation studies are from one of the 3 sources. for at least this pilot of the building construction trades and the Texas Talent Connection. The longer answer is that TWC and the Texas Workforce Investment Council want to partner with grantees as we move into future rounds of grants and hire external evaluators to evaluate those grants so that we both build performance data for you, but we also build hopefully moderate and high evidence internal to the state so that at some point there would be a state-based repository of evaluation studies that we're deemed to have found programs that had positive and significant outcomes and were at the moderate or high evidence. We can't do that on a one-by-one. It's be very difficult and be very expensive, but we'd like to do that moving forward for cohorts of grantees. So initially it's of the 3 sources.
And Lee, let me just keep you live for a moment. We had another question around, does the tier impact the grant amount that will be awarded?
Yeah, no, the tier does not. It's a bonus structure. So if you were able to demonstrate high evidence, you would gain bonus points that would put you over the 100 points for the application and potentially score, better than other applicants with better evidence as a base for your application. But for Texas Talent Connection, it does not affect the amount awarded.
Thank you, Lee. Excellent. There was a question I also saw for, it looked to be more along the lines of Celeste. If Celeste, are you still with us? It was asking about the ethics of control groups, and I don't know, as an evaluator, do you want to speak to that, Celeste?
Sure. Yeah, happy to talk about that. I know that is a question that comes up a lot when we talk about randomized control trials, meaning that a control group might, would be excluded from the treatment. But I guess there's a couple ways that I think about this. One, if you have a program that is oversubscribed, that is, like, you cannot serve everyone that needs the service or would like the service, then you're not serving some people no matter what. And so why not do it in a strategic way so that you can learn from it? Running a lottery type system, I would argue that a lot of times the way services are administered is also not fair, right? If it's first come, first serve, the folks who are there first might have more access to resources, have better transportation, have a more flexible work schedule. So I do think that, it's important to think about the cost benefit of running a randomized control trial. The other thing is that there are ways and there are models for randomizing where you can have some exceptions. So, a statistician is someone that could help you figure out, well, okay, we can have a certain number of kind of gimmies, where if there's someone that comes in that just is really in crisis and needs those services, that you don't have to turn them away, and they're able to kind of account for that in the model. And then the other thing to think about is what else is in the community or in the area that the control group is actually likely not getting nothing. They're probably getting something else. And that's important for a number of reasons. One, to know that people are not necessarily just, without any services, but also you want to account for that in your evaluation and to understand what you're actually comparing your program to. It might not be to nothing. It might be to a different program. So those are all things to think about, but I think the best thing is to really write down all those concerns, and when you're thinking about your evaluation plan, really addressing them one by one versus letting kind of this overarching fear of unfairness or ethics drive your decision making. I've seen lots of ways to address that, but I appreciate the compassion, that's behind that question. I think it's really important to keep hold of that compassion as well.
Jim,
Excellent, Celeste. Thank you. Yes, Lee, go ahead.
On Celeste, just to echo Celeste, I think message of, we don't want to turn people away, and there are other ways to do this completely. And one of the great utility ones is finding a different program, but there is a way to do it through using the UI database also. And we've worked with a number of university evaluators who have used the UI database to select a control group and based on regression analysis for, population characteristics. So it can be done without turning folks away.
Yeah, that's a great point, Lee. There are actually lots of rigorous evaluation models where you can use historic data, where you can actually construct comparison groups. So, there are different pros and cons with that, but there's an evaluation method that will work for you. And, it's just about kind of getting in the room with the right kind of technical minds to help you solve for those problems.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. There's a couple of comments around pay for performance, and also just, this is a very difficult process, and some feedback for us on how the state can help track using social. So thank you for that feedback. We also have some feedback around getting some help. And so definitely there's a request for technical assistance related to this whole evidence-based concept. And we do envision this is just the very start of this conversation in Texas. So as we move forward, this team will keep working to help answer questions and to help. We'll be learning too with you. So if that's any consolation, we're excited to keep learning and figuring this out. I think we have one more question for Lee. Was it around defining a new program? I'm not seeing that in the chat, but Lee, do you want to speak to new programs a little bit more? Since that poll did show new is where people are coming in.
Where they're coming in. So yeah, my suggestion is that and I'm looking at the question, how do we define a program new to the state that exists in other states, for question 1. So if it exists in other states, I would suggest it's not new. And I would suggest that if a grant applicant can work with another state to secure historic data from that program, that you could come in at least on the second tier, if not the third tier, the performance, but it would have to be noted that the problem with the performance tier at that point is you haven't actually operated the program. It's been operating in a different state. But I think you could use data from another state to say you're going to replicate the program and at least come in at the anecdotal requirement. So
Great.
I hope that answers the question. The answer is if it's being offered in another state, it's not new.
Thank you. Perfect. So I think it brings us almost to the end of our time together. We will leave the chat open for about 5 minutes if people would like to put more questions in. Wanted to thank everybody again, especially our speakers, Chairman Daniel, Lee Rector, Celeste Ritchie. Y'all have been amazing to work with and partner with on this initiative. And just a reminder to everybody, we will be posting this slide deck along with the results from all of the polls, including those first ones that we can show you when it's online. And so just want to thank everybody. This has been a really good conversation. Not the last, just the first. So have a great week, everybody. And we will talk to you very soon. Thank you so much. Oh, I have one last. This is an email. If you have other questions around evidence, please email us at evidence@twc.texas.gov. And with that, we are closing out. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great day.